I just got home from working on a project that I'm not ready to talk about publicly yet at a distillery out here in LA. If you're one of my Patreons, you know what I'm working on. And I wanted to hop onto YouTube really quickly and give you guys my tried and true baseline rum recipe. I have been talking to my members over on Patreon a little bit about this, and I figured I'd just share the recipe with you guys. So yeah, let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Robin from This Blog's Neat, and if you're new to this channel, welcome. I talk about rum and other distilled spirits. I taste rum and other distilled spirits. I make rum and other distilled spirits, and I try to document as much as I can on my channel. And what I'm going to give you guys today is my tried and true baseline rum recipe that is super simple, has a pretty high yield as far as ABV goes, and tastes wonderful. Is it super funky? No. Is it really, really clean? No. I think it's got a lot of fun flavors. For this recipe, all you need is molasses, water, and yeast. That is it. Now, I go with 100% molasses. I think this gives you the most flavorful rum rather than doing a mixture of molasses and sugar. I just think that this gives you the best tasting rum. And I always use baking grade molasses. Yes, this is more expensive than blackstrap. But again, I really like the flavors that come from a baking grade molasses. I think a blackstrap molasses tends to give you more grungy notes, but I don't think that they're beneficial. However, if you're like, Robin, I love the taste of blackstrap molasses in rum, yeah, then sub out blackstrap molasses. One thing I will emphasize, and I cannot emphasize this enough, make sure your molasses is unsulfured. It should say it on the label. It should say it when you order it. It should say it all over the place, unsulfured. No sulfur. You don't want any sulfur. So for example, grandmas, you can get these 1 gallon jugs pretty readily. This is kind of heavy to hold with one hand like this. And look at what it says under molasses. Look at what it says. Can you read it? It says unsulfured. Unsulfured. Did I emphasize enough that you need unsulfured molasses? Unsulfured molasses, because sulfur is used as a way to prevent spoiling, any type of spoilage. And we can consider fermentation a very controlled form of spoilage. So the sulfur, if you get molasses that has sulfur added in it, it is most likely going to inhibit your yeast growth. And worst case scenario, it's just going to not ferment at all. So make sure unsulfured. Then we have water. I'm going to leave this up to you. Water of your choice, go for it. If you know that you have good quality tap water, go for it. Great. Use good quality tap water. If you know that your tap water is not great, use jugs of water. Use your alternative. And for yeast, I tend to go for distiller's yeast. This is my baseline recipe. So I'm not trying to develop a whole bunch of crazy flavors with different yeast strains, but this is where you can play with that as well. If you have some yeast that you want to play with, go for it. So the amount of molasses that I use for my fermentation is 20% by volume of the total fermentation volume that I'm doing. So if I'm doing a 5-gallon batch, I will add 1 gallon of molasses and then 4 gallons of water. Yeah. So you can scale this up or scale this down, but it'll be 1 part molasses to 4 parts water. So 20% of the total volume will be molasses. And this should get you between like 10 to 12% ABV if it ferments out completely dry, which I think is pretty great. The starting specific gravity is going to vary depending on what molasses you pick up. We have molasses and water. That is it. And then the amount of yeast that I pitch is what is prescribed on the label that the yeast comes in. That is how much yeast I use. So usually if you get like small little packets of yeast, those are perfect for 5-gallon batches. Molasses goes in, then I use hot water in order to bring the temperature up. I like my starting temperature to be around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. I stir that up, aerate it enough, and then I'll pitch the yeast. And that's it. I'll let it sit for as long as it needs. However, there is a little asterisk, you know what I'm talking about. I will add in nutrients after 2 days. 2 days after I have pitched the yeast, I will add in nutrients. I won't add in a ton. I have added in like half of what the bag says to add. And I use the normal like Fermax BSG yeast nutrient. That is it. Right here, this one. This one's what I use. And I find that really helps the yeast not get stuck at all. While it's in its growth phase, you're providing all the nutrients and more that it could need. So when that ferments out, you have a wash that's about, we'll say, 10 to 12% ABV. And how long should you let it ferment? Let it ferment for as long as it needs. I will usually leave mine for like 3 weeks. Sometimes that's how long it takes. If it's really hot where you are, it might go faster. If it's colder where you are, it might go a little bit slower. Just keep an eye on it. If there's still activity, just let the yeast chug away. Don't rush it. And I find that will allow some more fun flavors to develop just because you're doing a longer fermentation. So after those few weeks goes by and it has finished fermenting, and usually you'll know this by the fact that all the sugar is gone and the activity has slowed in the fermenter, then I'll go ahead and distill. This is where you get to put your own signature touch on the rum, because my still is going to be different from your still. My distillation style is going to be different from yours. Some people distill a lot faster. I distill pretty slow. And that's going to impact, like the flavors that come through and everything. So for my baseline foolproof rum recipe, I'll do 2 pot distillations, the stripping run and the spirit run, right? This is pretty classic. For the stripping run, I am trying to get out just as much as I can. And usually the ABV of my low wines will be between like 30 to 35% ABV. And then for the spirit run, again, this is where you get to let your distiller self shine. This is the important part. So like I said, I will run the pot pretty slow. And I am tasting, this is me, tasting finger to mouth, just tasting as it's coming off. My spirit that ends up coming off the still and where I collect it is usually around 70 to 75% ABV. I don't typically go higher than that because I do like a lot of flavor to come through. But if this is something that you plan to age, either by putting a stave in it or putting it in a barrel, you can take that down a little bit farther to like all the way down to 65 if you want. Just go based off of taste. So yeah, that is my very straightforward, foolproof, baseline rum recipe that I hope you try. Let me know if you have your own go-to rum recipe that you think is pretty foolproof. Just as a little recap, because I feel like I talked a lot through each of the ingredients. My fermentation is made up of 20% by volume molasses, baking grade unsulfured. So if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, this is 1 gallon of unsulfured baking grade molasses. Then I fill the rest up with water. So again, for a 5-gallon batch, that's 4 gallons of warm to hot water, starting temperature around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I add in yeast of my choosing, which is normally just good old-fashioned distiller's yeast. After 2 days, I add in yeast nutrient, the Fermax BSG yeast nutrient, and then I let it just ferment out until it is completely done, until there's no more activity, and until, it's fermented out close to dry. And then distill it as you will. You're a distiller. This is what you're where you can put your signature. But I do a double pot distillation. My stripping run, the low wines that comes off of that, is usually between 30 to 35% ABV. And then my spirit run is usually between 70 to 75% ABV. I hope this video was helpful for you. And if you're interested in the fun and exciting project that I'm working on, please join us over on Patreon. And I do want to, I've mentioned my Patreons so many times, but I haven't actually said thank you to them. I do want to give a huge shout out to them. I really appreciate all of your support. You guys have been very, very supportive, especially with this new project. And if you, the viewer, would also like to join us, I would be so grateful. I've got a link in the description below where you can join us there. Let me know if you have any questions at all about this recipe.